Good afternoon, everyone. We are the Carolina Blue Group. My name is Shannon.
I'm Alyssa.
I'm Marley.
I'm
I'm Sam.
Sophia.
And today we are going to be talking about the Deflategate and the New England Patriots. We're going to go about how the New England Patriots got into this controversy, how it impacted the team's reputation as well as the NFL's reputation. We're also going to explore how the NFL and organizations responded, the various processes and regulations, and then also examine some efforts to restore the brand and some other proposed solutions. So we're going to first go over the organization and the problem. So what was Deflategate? Why was it so bad? Then we're going to go into the solutions and the impacts. So what was Deflategate and why was it so bad? So we're first going to just talk about the New England Patriots at first. So they are among the most iconic franchises in the NFL. They were established in 1959 as the eighth franchise in the NFL. In 2000, they hired Bill Belichick as their 14th head coach. And in that same year, they drafted Michigan quarterback Tom Brady. He was the fourth string quarterback and was drafted in the sixth round. And that following season, so the 2001 to 2002 season, the Patriots claimed their first Super Bowl championship, which marked the beginning of a 20-year dynasty that some may love and some may hate. And so in this dominance, the Patriots have won 6 Super Bowl titles, which is tied for the most in the NFL, and have won 17 AFC championships. In the 2014 season, the Patriots won their fourth Super Bowl against the Seattle Seahawks. However, this victory would be overshadowed by a controversy that rocked the world. So after finishing the AFC championships or AFC regular season at 12-4, they were the top seed in the AFC playoffs. They advanced to the Super Bowl after defeating the Indianapolis Colts. It was a pretty bad beating, and then went on to advance to the Super Bowl and go on and beat the Seattle Seahawks. But the AFC Championship was a little bit of questionable in question because the Colts said that the Patriots had not used the regular balls and that they were underinflated and were not with the standard pressure. And so now I'm going to pass it on to Marley to go over this controversy a little bit more.
Thank you, Shannon. Yeah, so just to get a little bit more into the background and just give a brief overview of what Shannon just told us about. This scandal occurred during the 2014 AFC Championship game, where the Patriots defeated the Colts 45-7 to send them to the Super Bowl, where they beat the Seattle Seahawks. Unfortunately, this controversy kind of cast a shadow over that win in the Super Bowl, and also raised questions about the team's competitive integrity. And this ultimately just damaged the Patriots' reputation by suggesting that they use unethical conduct for competitive advantage, which again just created a lot of controversy that overshadowed their on-field performance. A little bit more about why this happened and just looking at some of the contextual factors to consider. Starting with the protocol. At the time, teams were able to keep possession of game balls after official inspection, followed by a lack of consistent mid-game pressure verification, which just opened a window of opportunity for the balls to be tampered with and it go unnoticed throughout the duration of the game. With scientific factors, some people think environmental factors likely played a significant role. They've looked at the ideal gas law, which explains how temperatures of 48 degrees or lower can naturally lower ball pressure. But this is very unlikely that it kind of played a role. The game time temperature was about 50 degrees, so it wasn't really cold enough to cause the pressure drop to, I think, 10.5 PSI, which is in the regulation minimum is 12.5. And then also just looking at more contextual elements, and just the Patriots as a whole in their organization. They had a previous controversy, Spygate controversy, where they were caught filming signals of coaches of other teams on their sidelines or in games. but also just the fact that the officials relied on subjective feel rather than precise measurements of the balls. And then again, just the dramatic score difference of 45-7 in an AFC championship. To many, this would just be seen as like a little bit unrealistic and a bit questionable as to how that could happen. But now I'm going to pass it over to Sophia, and she's going to get into a little bit more into the impacts of this scandal.
So as Marley just said, we're going to talk about the impacts and significance. Who are the stakeholders and kind of how did things unfold? So first and foremost, who is affected? We know kind of the center of the team at this point is Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, Robert Kraft, more so executives as, you know, the team as a whole. So Tom Brady kind of was hit hardest, if you will, with a suspension of 4 games in the 2016 season. This was just kind of the NFL's way to slap somebody on the wrist and kind of say, we are going to reprimand you for this misconduct. The Patriots were fined $1 million and they lost 2 of those first round draft picks again in that 2016 season. This kind of delay that you'll notice is about 2 years after it happened. You know, the AFC championships took place at the end of 2015, and this is all happening in the 2016 season. It took them about 2 years to litigate and investigate, which is where that $20 million figure comes in for the league. They spent about $20 million again to litigate and investigate what happened and try to get to the bottom, get to a solution, see if they were actually guilty, and you know, see what they could do about it that would make the public happy. More so into the consequences. Legally, Brady and the NFL Players Association filed appeals, and they continue to file these appeals again over that 2-year time period. That was harmful because it kept the story in the news. And as we kind of all know, as advertising majors, keeping the story in the news and letting the media cycle take over the narrative is something that we absolutely do not want. And it doesn't allow us to have control over the public relations side of things, which is not what anybody wants when they're going through a PR crisis. When we kind of look at changes, what happened, what was the result of this? The league did implement guidelines and kind of say, all right, we need to have a set of equipment regulations that's standard protocol. And that kind of resulted in random ball checks that the referees were able to hold on to. They were allowed to check the ball and check its PSI whenever they felt so. Maybe they felt suspicion, they were able to do that. Some team penalties, as we already discussed, they lost money and valuable draft picks, but more so, they were not already a popular team. People don't like winners and people don't like, you know, these big dynasties rolling through. We kind of are seeing that unfold with the Chiefs right now. And so the media and the fans kind of wanted somebody, and they wanted the Patriots to be wrong. And so the stakeholders lost value in these, you know, allegations. Again, with that Spygate just coming off of that, they're just not doing well from a PR perspective, despite winning so many games and doing well on the field. And then kind of Brady's reputation, I would say this goes down as his, you know, he's the center of this. And though he has 7 Super Bowl titles, this is still referenced right behind those as one of his bigger problems, one of his bigger moments in NFL history. So I think that's definitely worth noting when it comes to consequences here. Next, we have the significance. As I've discussed, it influenced the public perception about the team in the league, which was already not a good perception, and it kind of kept that. It again brought up the idea of fair play and team integrity and kind of how far was a team willing to go to win or to be victorious. And they didn't like that the Patriots were willing to cheat openly twice, allegedly. So just again, keeping that in the media, keeping that scandal internationally, the Deflategate became one of the biggest scandals in the NFL, and it certainly goes down as such. And this didn't have to be that way. If with a clear PR crisis communication, this could have been pretty well handled by the league, the Patriots, and Brady himself. It also highlighted the NFL disciplinary processes and, you know, brought attention to the gaps, and the league stepped up and changed those gaps, though they were kind of unclear with their messaging throughout the whole time. They did implement, actions that people ultimately were happy with and allowed them to rest easy about the whole case. So now passing on to Alyssa.
Thanks, Sophia. So now we're going to talk about the solutions that were unsatisfactory, what worked, what didn't, and what do we suggest that should have been done. So the main issue with the communication process started with the people in charge. There were many inconsistencies from the faces of the franchise as well as the people in charge, as starting with head coach Bill Belichick. So his response to the situation was very aloof. He kind of alluded to having no knowledge of the situation. He said he was totally and completely unaware of what was going on. And while these statements may have been intended to draw the line in some sense and probably try to shut down and get rid of these rumors, it also just gave the impression that the head coach of one of the most detail-oriented sports franchises was deliberately, essentially, avoiding accountability and was almost entirely disconnected from equipment procedures. And the interpretation raised questions about his credibility as a leader and willingness to run this team effectively. And moving on to Tom Brady, the quarterback. So his response was very vague. He used non-committal language in his responses. And although he was noticeably lighthearted about the situation, he later just firmly denied any wrongdoings. As previously stated, he chose vague language that left the door open for speculation through the media and his fans. And his reluctance to speak with clarity or convictions disappointed many fans and created doubt about whether he was being entirely truthful. And his lack of assertiveness not only accelerated the situation and furthered the rumors and just the speculation, truthfulness, and fairness behind the whole situation. It tarnished his legacy as a quarterback. So moving on to the team owner, Robert Kraft. So he took a different approach about the situation. At first, he was very defensive of the team and the franchise, but as the investigation from the NFL started to be publicly announced and these penalties were being levied over the franchise with the loss of the draft picks, Tom Brady's suspension, and the fine, he stated that he would not appeal the punishment, explaining that he was making the decision for the good of the game. And this statement stung many supporters who believe Kraft was prepared to challenge the league's judgment, and instead his retreat of the whole situation appeared to be essentially a surrender, damaging the credibility of his earlier more defiant statements, which lost credibility as the face, or not the face of the franchise, just more of the leader of the whole organization. So moving on to the NFL and their reaction. Their reaction was quite slow and inconsistent and reactive to public narratives and leanings. But before the investigation was launched, leaked reports from unnamed sources created a narrative and dominated the media. So the league would later would launch an investigation that was very vague and undescriptive in their responses to the media concerning the investigation. So they ultimately found that it was more probable than not that the footballs were tampered with, and Brady had at least some knowledge of what was going on, as cited by Wells 2015, and therefore there was no definitive conclusion. And this showed that the NFL just seemed to be more concerned about maintaining their image than rather delivering a definitive solution to the situation. So now I'm going to pass it off to Sam, who is going to talk about what we believe should have been done.
So, in looking at the solutions here, first we have to address kind of what Alyssa talked about and one of the biggest missteps in handling the entire Deflategate incident, which is really just the lack of a unified message and transparency throughout the process. Kind of what Sophia alluded to earlier, the inconsistent statements from players, coaches, and executives kind of allowed the media to control the narrative and for public speculation to spiral and unravel here. So to correct this, we're offering solutions that center around presenting a unified front across all communication channels. And before we present this, I want to be clear that the section we're about to discuss takes the assumption that the Patriots are innocent of any wrongdoing. So these solutions are more so targeted at not covering something up, but more so proactively defending the team's integrity. With that being said, the first solution we recommend is the creation of sort of a crisis communication command center. This would serve as a centralized hub for all messaging during the incident. Before anyone in the organization speaks to the media, whether it's a player, coach, or executive, they would receive guidance from this command center to ensure that messaging remains consistent and strategic. The objective here is really simple. We're just trying to regain control of the narrative before it unravels, as we saw that it did happen in real time. And when you have a united front with no conflicting remarks, that really helps sort of maintain the credibility of the organization. When every statement supports the exact same message, the same messaging and communications, it becomes very or significantly harder for the media or public to question the team's version of events. So now leading into the second solution, that is for the Patriots to have immediately launched their own independent third-party investigation with full public transparency across the board. So following the initial allegations, the team should have quickly and clearly denied any knowledge of wrongdoing. This includes committal language like we did not see in Brady's instance. And simultaneously with this launch of the investigation, they would also establish interviews and prep their other three executives so that they could then present to the media a more clear and unified messaging. And then that'll lead us into our actual suggestion here. So yeah, following the launch of the third-party investigation and rollout of that, our group would recommend a coordinated media plan that would begin with those three high-profile interviews I talked about with Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, and Robert Kraft in this situation. These three interviews represent both the player, the coach, and the executive, which kind of covers the organization from every angle that we could be attacked from. And each will be fully prepped to deliver that clear and consistent messaging we've been talking about. And then in the days that follow that, several players would then share scripted social media statements. These kind of would function like a press release where they would directly address fans and the public, sort of just denouncing any accusations of cheating. And once again, reiterating the team's core values and their cleanness to the integrity of the game. We really feel that this strategy resolves many of the challenges the Patriots faced in their actual response. When we have the third-party investigation that provides legitimacy for things, the transparency in our findings rebuilds the trust that we've lost, and the controlled and consistent messaging from the key figures sort of helps reposition the organization in a more credible and favorable light moving forward. And then in conclusion here, Deflategate is just really a prime example of a failure in communication between an organization, the media, and the public at large. The impacts of this crisis have been massive, as we've talked about. It really just left a stain on Tom Brady's legacy, and then further kind of put down a organization and a team that people already weren't big fans of, mostly because of how much they've been winning up to that point. But we really feel that if the Patriots had employed some of our possible solutions while providing clear, consistent, and transparent messaging once again, we do feel that the narrative would not have spiraled out of control into the communications crisis that it ultimately became post Deflategate. With that being said, we thank you for hearing our presentation and can now open the meeting up for any questions that you may have. And then we'll have our references on the next two slides.